Yeah, welcome back once again to this Broad Life. Today we have a big fish on the show, Jonathan Farrell. Jonathan, I'll let you do a brief introduction about yourself, but just want to share a little context on how I met Jonathan. So I met Jonathan. Jonathan is someone I met through a friend. So I went to school with a friend I went to school with back in Nigeria. Also came to the US for business school and so happens to be Jonathan's classmate, and I met Jonathan through that friend. And as fate will have it, we started seeing each other more and more often for a lot of reasons. And yeah, so having him on the show today just to share his background with us, and I'm sure we'll learn a few things from him. And also, he has a very unique background. I'll just let him handle it. I'll let him do it. I mean, I don't want to speak for him. So I have Yemi as usual with me here today. Want to say hi, Yemi?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another edition, and I'm sure you're already looking forward to this. We're going to allow Jonathan to lead the show mostly today. Yeah. So
Yeah,
welcome, everyone.
I mean,
Over to you,
don't
Jonathan.
worry. Putting you on the spot. So, Jonathan, I'll just let you do a brief introduction and let people get to know you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Jonathan. I am originally from Brooklyn, New York. Been pretty much around the world and around the country, but my career path and my path to where I'm at now is, unique as they mentioned before. Most of it is kind of the route that I got here, right? And being a native, obviously American, and there's a lot of different paths to get to where you want to get to, and navigating, I would say, even the American landscape is even difficult for us, right? So I'll say I did my undergrad at Boston College. I worked in the commercial aviation sector before going back to business school, and I was a flight attendant. So I was just a normal guy. I was spent all of my career in the aviation industry. I started off as a baggage handler and kind of worked my way up, right? um,
Nice.
in I worked for an airline here in the United States called JetBlue, which for size and scope, I guess, probably about the sixth largest airline in the US. Mostly domestic in North America, Caribbean, and a bit of South America. They fly Airbus 320s and 321s, mostly across the US. Has their major headquartered bases out of New York City, so that's where in New York JFK Airport, and that's where I kind of started out at. Eventually, I moved up to Boston, which was one of their ancillary hubs, and that's where I was at through college up until business school. Now, the reason I decided to get a business school was actually through undergrad I had a couple of investment banking internships that I wanted to get to, and I got to the final round. I'll never forget it. The final round at two, one with Citibank and one with Scotiabank, and I didn't convert neither of them. And I thought about what my life would be if I would have converted them from undergrad, right? Crazy. Um, and also the thing is being from New York and thinking about like the city, and what I've come to realize, especially at Wall Street, is that I lived around a lot of people, black people, right, in New York, but I never knew anybody who worked in those buildings, right? It was the same kind of cast of characters. If you know public transportation, they all, for me, if you know Brooklyn, or if you'll ever get to know Brooklyn, a lot of them come in from the LIRR station and Atlantic Avenue, and then they all get off on Wall Street, right? And if you know about New York, Long Island is kind of where I would say the higher end, richer people tend to have houses and families. So they all get on that station, and then they'll all get off and go to Wall Street and go make the big bucks, right? And I always wondered about me as a person, like, hey, how can I be from a big city like this? And I don't know not a single person working at Wall Street. Like, so those always kind of things always stayed in my mind. And I wanted to kind of break into that field, right? Obviously, I've made a complete different turn based on the opportunities that were available. And I started working in the airline industry. Nonetheless, but that idea of being working at Wall Street, and really it was from Wall Street Oasis. I just Googled what was the highest paying job I could get, right? Like coming out of business school, and
All
then
about the money, right?
Right. That's it. That's all I thought about, right? And being New York being the hub of a lot of things, it's actually quite difficult for people from New York to actually advance in New York. It's very strange dynamic, right? There's a lot of pitfalls in life. Anyways, so I always had the plan of going back to business school because I knew if I didn't get it in undergrad, I knew I could get it from MBA program, right? So ultimately, working at JetBlue, we up until the pandemic. And for that time, I really thought like serious, critical issues about trying to, I didn't think the airline was going to survive, right? Like when you are there and companies constantly talking about 40, $60 million losses, quarterly, like Like you just like, all right, and
Yeah,
in the
this is going
U.S.
to shut
there's
down one day.
right, and there's a history of defunct airlines, right? AirTran, Continental. Like you can go Northwest, you could go down the list of airlines that have failed, right? So I knew all those things, and I was like, all right, man, I gotta jump out the parachute. Considering that was my only majority of my life and career was in the airline industry, I said, hey, it's either try something now or I was kind of getting into my 30s and I was like, hey man, let me give this a shot. So I applied for a bunch of schools and fortunately, I mean, I was on the waiting list for a long time, for a very long time, I would say, longer than most other people. Ultimately, what they say, you only need one person to give you the ring. WashU, Olin in St. Louis, that was who ultimately chose me and they gave me the ring. And yeah, and I wanted to, once I got there, all I knew is that I needed an invitation to the big dance, right? Like that's all you need. You just need to get in the door, and I felt like
Yeah.
right, and then I could compete, and that's kind of how that got me in there. Came in, I was active in school, but also I knew the prize and the guide was to get the job, right? To make the career switch, right? And even me being a domestic student, it's incredibly difficult when you have a non-transferable background, right?
Mm.
Like and I recognized that very early, but I knew that I should over index on interviewing, being very personable, understanding and doing elite level research, right? And practice taking live bullets, especially with interviews and doing that with my classmates and stuff like that. And I would say all that preparation, it got me my internship. I did an internship at Nike in finance, which was a complete career switch as well, because like I said, I had to out interview everybody and I knew that, right? So I made sure I did that. And then ultimately re-recruited in my second year and got into big tech. And same thing, I knew I just needed an opportunity and I got to where I needed to get to, right?
I mean, it helps when you're likable, right? So when people like you, I mean, when you're interviewing and people look at you like, how do I see this person as a teammate? I've heard about it before. Like the way interviewers think about it is, if I'm stuck in an elevator or an airplane with this person for 2-3 hours, can I can I tolerate them or
I
can I
survive.
enjoy their exactly? Can I enjoy time with them? So if they think, oh, you're a personable person and you're not dumb, obviously, you got into Olin, and so
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they know that you get for. Yeah,
And
I mean that's
interesting.
really not a brief introduction.
Yeah,
Just want to put it out there.
and
yeah.
I think for me, Jonathan, the story of resilience,
Yeah.
determination, that self-determination, right, and that focus, I think is something that I really very much resonates with, and I think that's something most Africans, like most international students, will resonate with. If you know what I'm saying, and I can see, like, I can draw that parallel. I can actually see where the, I mean, like the source of that connection, right, like that bond, where it's actually coming from. And interestingly, today we are mostly going to be talking about Africans, like African students. We are going to be looking at things from African perspective. Um, we wanted someone that's going to come and share his own view, like like
Can I add one thing
Before
on top
you,
of that?
okay,
yeah,
Yeah, the one thing I would say too is that I actually didn't get accepted my first year to any business school. So I got in on my second go around, right? So you want to talk about persistence, and I know that's something that
yeah, persistence.
resonates
Yeah,
with
yeah,
people,
I
right?
like that.
I had
I like
to
that.
go another cycle,
yeah.
retest, and everything. So trust me, I
Yeah,
know the whole
yeah,
gamut of
that's
it.
great. Ahmed, you
There's
wanted to say
one
something?
thing before we even get to the business school.
Yeah,
Sorry, before we get to
yeah,
the
yeah.
business, there's something I want to ask Jonathan. Have you, or how do I put this question? I'm thinking about the best way to put this question. Like, okay, do you know about your African heritage? Like, what does that look like? What does it look like?
So like most people on this side of the world,
Yeah.
it only goes far as back. But my family is from Haiti, which
Okay.
is a small country in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
That's as far as the roots that I know. My grandmother came here to the United States. And my father and my mother were born in the Caribbean, and then they came here poor, struggle life like any other person. But my experience has been all the time has been in the U.S.
Okay.
As that. So
I mean, one day I think we should find a way to get you to take the test and see where your DNA leads to. Maybe
Jonathan
Nigeria.
are probably taking that test, right? That you
no,
should.
I haven't. I haven't.
Yeah,
You know.
okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, yeah, me.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, guys. So like I said, or like I was trying to establish, we're mostly going to be talking about African students, Africans living abroad, especially in the US right there. So, if just by way of starting, I will ask Jonathan, like, what is your experience like living with Africans? Like, what is your experience maybe in school and outside of school generally? What is your impression about Africans generally?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that, like
Yeah,
before, like actually, I mean, you've probably met a lot of Africans before,
yeah,
many, but we're looking at it from a business school context, like before business school, then after, or during and after business school. Like, are there things that change your perception before, then having experience, maybe friendship or closeness with a lot of Africans? Then does that change anything about your impression?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, I have kind of a couple different stages of it, right? So growing up living in New York, I didn't like personally have a lot of Africans in like high school or undergrad. Like even me, I've been trying to think. I mean, in junior high school or things like that, not much, right? Now I knew in Harlem, in New York, there was a big West African, like French speaking African. I'm not sure which country they were from, and Muslim Africans that I knew that was up in New York City in the Bronx. I mean, yeah, Harlem in the Bronx. Didn't have much. When I went to undergrad, it was a few, right? Like, so I went to Boston College, which is primarily Roman Catholic. So they had some African students that were doing their PhD in theology, right? So and they were generally older people, right? Because they're at that level, right? And, that were more of a religious context. So, I didn't really, that was different, right? They were like priests in training, right? So that was that. And then some very, very little in undergrad. There was some, but, they were very focused and dedicated. Then when I got to business school, it was, and then I came in during COVID. Right? So my first half of the semester, we had African students, but everybody was completely virtual. We had our core teams with Africans on it, right? And you can only do one of the, only so much. I know I personally sought to try to connect as many people because I felt like I didn't have that connection from undergrad, right? Because I knew there were African students, but they really didn't mix that well, right? They kind of stayed to the side. So I was like, okay, in business school, I kind of got, and considering our school didn't even have like 100 MBA students, right? So I was like, all right, why don't we all gather everybody together, right? And, considering where we are at is like, hey, let's put our heads together and ultimately get to when we want to get to, right? But the funny thing was I'll say this, right, is that all of this, it was the first semester, almost all of them missed it, but then they started to come around Christmas time in January, and winter is here, right? Like, so I said I picked everybody up from the airport, and obviously there's some weather, right? Like, and the jackets people were not prepared to have when they got here, in that time, right? Now everybody will come during the summer, so you have time to warm up. But yeah, I would say a bond was significantly stronger during business school and being in the trenches and needing to count on somebody, right? Like, because we all know the coursework is difficult, right? And while there's people who can be like, you can't pass business school being an individualist, right? You got to put yourself as a team no matter what, right? So, yeah, like I said, I always believed in putting two heads are better than one, right? Especially when we're going through our stuff and working together. So I sought to, and then I also wanted to make sure that I pushed that, hey, it's really important for us. While the school is great, but we really need to go get our internships and our jobs because that's what we're ultimately graded on in the game of life, I guess,
The real
right? So,
world. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
interesting.
Kind of interesting story that you were like the conduit for the Africans within within the business school. I mean, I would naturally expect all the Africans to come together, come into a totally different country. Some of them never been to the US before. They should naturally gravitate towards each other and try to be friends. But I mean, I understand it was COVID, so there was. I don't think there was that connection before they all came in here.
Well, I would say this, right? Like, this would have been moving to business school is my third time moving across the US, right? So I understand the difficulty and being broke and trying to move on top of that, right?
Yes.
Like, and I've never made that kind of money before, right? So I understood like there's things that, like even just a small gesture, like everybody who knows me from Olin will know I'll pick them up from the airport, right? I don't care what time, whatever, it's fine. And then I would always take them to this place called Leaves Fried Chicken. Like that was our introduction. Welcome to the US, right? Come get this fried chicken. You had a long travel. Let's eat this. And you can ask anybody. That's where I dropped everybody off. And then, you know, and then understanding like where to find apartments, how does the system work, right? Like all of these things, right? And like I said, because I know how it is to move, I was like, what is the point of holding all the information to myself when we have a community, right? And isn't the business school experience about, you know, networking and building some chemistry to help each other in the future? That's the whole point of it. So like, you know, you're coming from somewhere, this is your first time in America. I have that kind of experience. I've known people like that, right? And I understand like you need to get a cell phone, you need to like if you have your apartment ready, fine, but to get internet and understanding, you know, Missouri is not necessarily a place that you can go with public transportation, right? You need a car. So it's all right to get, I'll do whatever I can to get people settled, because I know when I moved, I wish I had somebody there to aid me, right? So I'm just really repaying what I've gotten and help back to others, right?
Thanks, Jonathan. Like, I feel like saying on behalf of all African students, saying a big thank.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
I've had,
remember my first night at the
yeah,
airport. It was crazy. Like I was on the low battery and I couldn't make a phone call. I couldn't book a Uber because I had to set up accounts, but I didn't have a US number yet. Like it was very challenging. Like just coming in, not connecting with anybody before flying in, and it was. I think a security guy, also an elderly black man that helped me. And it happened that I saw him. I was flying to Canada again through RDU, North Carolina. I saw him, I recognized him, I walked up to him like, thanks for that. I was like, I can't remember you. And I just gave him the story. I was like, oh, wow. He was just doing his own thing. And I mean, that was the person that helped me, total stranger, and which I really appreciated. Yeah.
yeah,
So
interesting.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things, Jonathan, I think you actually did mention food, right? Like one of the things Africans generally do struggle with is food, right? An average African student, like it's already used, I mean, accustomed to some kind of food, like some kind of cuisines in a way. So, and it's really interesting, like you already know, like you know the kind of sport to bring these guys to when they first like transition into the US,
Mm-hmm.
which is really good, right? I think that's one thing I would say I really struggled with, like getting the right kind of food and all of that. But I will ask you specifically, like, are there any? I mean, this is just on a very mild note, right? Like, are
Mm-hmm.
there African cultures that you learned maybe around food, or maybe not necessarily food, like getting to meet and interact with Africans, you know, students and all of that? Are there cultures that were strange to you? Like, are there stuff that were like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, I'm very open, right? So I understand, like I said, I understand it from both sides of the aisle, right? Like, why is this person being so nice to me, right? What does he really want, right? Like, you know, there's a defensive mechanism to that, right?
Mhm.
But you know, I could say that, okay, so it's like I would say this point in business school was probably the most interaction I've had with Africans, right? Like I said, they weren't in any of my previous jobs, weren't in any of my schools to that nature, right? So it's learning them, right? And learning what's important to them, right? And one of the things, right, like that I found that was really interesting was like how prideful, right? One of my classmates said that, you know, like one of their goals was to go back and hold office, or to like represent Nigeria in like a in like the World Bank or something like that. And I thought that was very, very noble, right? Considering I'm an American, I'm like, man, like the government is just, you know, it's just an entity, right? Like, but like that gave like that rubbed off on me, right? The goal, like setting those kind of goals, right? You know, like sometimes you just think, oh, I'm just here to make money and, you know, whatever, and just kind of, but like thinking of something like a long reaching goal, like a North Star.
yeah,
um that was one thing. When it comes to culture and music, right? I mean, I don't know much besides whatever's on the radio, right? Like, and you know the big stuff, right? But there's a lot of artists and things and that I just don't have. I didn't know, right? And understanding and I would say overall in the US there's a lot more African influence that is starting to creep in, right? And also now we have you know, more second and third generation Africans that are being more embedded in society, right? Like, so kind of learning all of those things, right? And just understanding even like approach, right? Like, you know, like I said, I felt like I'm very open. I'm very like, hey, what's up? How you doing? Like, you know, I just met you today, but you know, we still friends, right? And you know, that's not always the case, right? Sometimes, but at the same time, like understanding how things are for, from the life that you had before, and kind of like merging it with what we have and the system that we have here, and kind of blending those things together to kind of make their organic kind of, I don't know how to describe, but an organic kind of experience here, right? And that learning experience that I've taken, right, and understanding and all of those things, and like we mentioned, food, right? Like thankfully here in Missouri we had an African store, right, that I had never been to before, right, and all that kind of stuff, right, and even getting all of that, and then going to a friend's house and getting some smells that I have never smelled before, right, like so I'm like, what's cooking in here? I've never really, and it's pretty common, right? Island, Jamaican, like Dominican, like all those stuff is kind of on the same aisles, but African cuisine is completely different, right? So all of those things, kind of blending it all together is kind of helped me understand and aid and kind of open my own eyes as well, you know?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, talking about sharing like big goals, North Star goals. I mean, Ahmed here has some very crazy goals that can be very intimidating, right? So I mean, that's expected from Africans. Again, it's good that you can easily resonate with that. Like we have big dreams, right?
Your volume.
Yeah, you're freezing.
I think I was probably on mute. I think I muted
Oh,
my
okay.
speaking
Okay.
to eliminate background noises. Yeah. So I think the while you were talking about your grandparents moving here, which parents from Haiti and coming to the US, I'm just curious whether there are some, I would say, habits that you have. I mean, you're American, right? So they'll think what that makes them go like, okay, what's wrong with this boy? I mean, that just gives them that shock, like, okay, this is not this is not how we'll behave as Haitian. So this guy is just
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
different, it's American, that's culture difference, yeah.
yeah, I mean that's common, right?
Yeah.
And I would say a lot of where, and if people know New York, I grew up in like East Flatbush. That's a very like Caribbean heavy influence type of area of New York City, right? Um, all I could say is this, right? Obviously, I could tell you when I was going after my education goals, right? People from that older generation never really, they only know doctor, lawyer, engineer, right? They don't know anything else, right? Like, or nurse. You can add nurse in there because they like that, right? But so to kind of walk the path is weird, but also it's fine, right? That's my father always used to say, right? Your job is to just be better than I was, right? And fortunately for me, I had to not take a lot of his advice too, right? Because he was like, "Hey, man, just get a job and go start a family and just go ahead, right? Everything will figure it out." I was like, I said, Dad, we survived for a long time and now it's time to live, right? So like, you gotta do better, right? So yeah, I think a lot of that, and even when I started in the airline industry, they were like, "What do you?" It's like, okay, I guess, sure, like it's like you could get a job at the mechanic shop or something, right? Like so, or in New York, it'll be the big thing was to get a city job back in the day, right? You just get a city job. You work, 15, 20 years or with the transit company, with the bus or the train company, and you just good, right? And that's kind of how it was. But yeah, I think taking this path, right, kind of opens it up, right? And I say that we grew, and like I said, I think none of us really knew the path, right? Fortunately, I was always on the internet trying to figure something out, right? Like, and thank goodness we had that, right? So it wasn't easy, but I think, obviously we have all the information and the data in our hands. So it's like obviously leveraging that and then, trying to find your interest and blend all of that in to ultimately get to the path that you want to work on.
Yeah, that's really some great insights. I think let's begin to just round up gradually, right? Coasting home. I will ask Jonathan like to just be like a two-in-one question, right? Like lessons and message. What would you say? It's like a big lesson, if there are any anyway, that you've learned from African students. And what would be your message to Africans out there trying to like come to the US either for study or to work?
Yeah. There's a couple of them, right? I would say you guys had a very positive outlook on
Thank you.
America and the working environments here in America. I would say that, right? And I'll be like, hey guys, it's not as sweet as you think, right? What I would say is obviously when you come to business school, focus on your job, your career. I think one of the things, right, that a lot of people don't know, right? You don't know what the companies are here, right? I think that that's one of the biggest things, right? And there's no amount of research or timing that can help you for that, right? We have, thousands of companies here in the United States. And I think that that's one of the biggest like ramp ups, right? Because it's like, hey, you need to apply to such and such companies. We all know about the big ones, right? Google, Meta, the big names, right? But there's also opportunities elsewhere, right? Like, would anybody consider American Airlines as an opportunity or a place for an African to come and work, right? Not necessarily, but there's options, right? So understanding what the landscape is, and then understanding the nuance of wherever you ultimately land, right? Being an American from the Northeast and a West Coast American is completely different, right? Or even a Southern person or Northeast, Southeastern, everywhere.
West, thinking,
Right. And I remember I remember meeting an African that's at Utah, right? And I was like, man, what's going on over there, right? Like
Different landscape.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I was like, I wonder we talked about his experience and things like that, and kind of getting all of that, because even me as an American in Utah, it's not really a place I would go to even for vacation, right? So I would say understand the nuance of the market that you're entering into, the location that you're entering into, and really understand that even if you work hard and you do everything you have to do, there's still more, right? There's still a personal aspect of it. There's a team aspect of it, right? We used to call it here water cooler talk, right? Like, and I've seen immigrants from other countries also struggle with that aspect, right? As well, right? It's not only about, and I'm not saying, suck up to your boss and be like super friendly and go to every outing. I didn't say you'll do all of that, right? But there's also a personal aspect of it, right? Like we mentioned earlier, like who you're going to be stuck in the airport with for 3 hours, right? Understand those kind of things. Just maybe you could start trying to understand what American football is, right? That's a, that's an easy concept, right? Like, because
that's
American
correct.
football is the thing. Basketball, find a sport, right? For the guys, I'll say find a sport, right? That's an easy way to like kind of connect with people, right? And like we don't do cricket, and very few people do like F1 racing, right? There's some people, but so I will say, yeah, all of the kind of, to wrap it all up, I would say that there's a lot of nuance, right? And understanding the company and where you're going to, and I would say ultimately lean on others, right? Lean on people who are here before you, right? Like I do see that a lot of times, is that some African students can be a lot more closed off, right? You have to kind of you have to be vulnerable to an extent, right? To be able to really get the information and absorb it, and to be able to kind of do what you have to do. I feel like I've only gotten this far is because I've watched all the mistakes other people have made, and just, it's like Squid Games, right? Don't take the same fall that the other guy did, right? And I think there's a lot to be learned from that, right? Just use the people that are next to you, lean on them, right? Whether it could be a person from any race, anywhere, right? And then there's a corporate system that's a little bit weird, right? Like I said, Americans, we do our business a little bit differently, right? And it can vary significantly from one company to another, right? So learning and leaning and networking and becoming more than just the best person at your job, right? Because there's more to that, right? Being the best student, there's still more to that, right? While that gets you individual accolades in the American system, there's more to that. You have to kind of be a part of it. You have to be approachable, right? Even in the first place, because if you're not approachable, they're like, oh, this guy just sits in the corner and just hammers out spreadsheets all day. There needs to be more to that, and I think that's the main message I probably want to say and get across. I know that was a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, I have two quick reactions to that. One, I get the part where you want to understand the culture and also kind of integrate and understand the sports, entertainment, because this is what these are the topics people use for their small talks. But then sometimes you're probably, it's happened to me several times in a team meeting at work, and somebody makes a reference to a movie, something from a movie, pop culture, like, and I just feel lost. Like everybody gets it. I'm the only one who doesn't get it. And they just chat on and on about it for a few minutes before we get back to the meeting. Like in that kind of case, you can't really help it. I can't sit down and start watching all movies that's ever made, if ever made in the US, just to understand this. Like if I know it, fine. If I don't, but I understand the part that you have to make conscious efforts too. also, I mean, try to understand some of these things when they're talking about basketball, especially Super Bowl. If there's a Super Bowl, you have to watch it because the next day that's what everybody's talking about. So you have to watch that. Playoffs in the basketball, even if you don't watch the NBA during playoffs, make sure you do and you're able to talk about that. So yeah, I totally
And
get.
you both went to Division 1 sports schools, right? Which I'm jealous about because my
Yeah,
Absolutely.
school didn't have that. Did you? You
yeah,
have to partake in those things. I would
yeah.
have died to be at a UNC basketball game or Wisconsin football game, right? I would have died to have that experience during business
Yeah.
school. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I always watch those games because I mean they're free tickets and they're usually weekends, so I just had to go watch them. So there's one more thing that I also want to talk. I mean, it made sense. What you said actually makes sense and totally made sense because and it's something that I also heard from one of my professors back in the business school is that in as much as you want to stay close to your Africans, your African friends, the black people here, you still want to make sure you network with other races. And you pointed that out clearly, like other races are very important. The professor, the course, I think the course title was Management of Workplace Diversity. So he said like maybe every 6 months, every 1 year, reassess your network. And if they all look like you're in big trouble. You're not going to move far in life. They have to look, a lot of them have to look different. If they all look like you, like when they're playing golf as white people, they really like golf, right? There's nobody in there talking about you positive matter because they don't even know you. They don't know anything about you. You're just here focusing on your work, staying close knit to your black Africans or black Americans. So that's just wanted to put it out there like, okay, this is
Yeah, I mean, I agree to an
yeah,
extent, right? Because also I would say that, as we all know, right, you're not going to stay friends with everybody once you graduate business school, right?
yeah,
So
Absolutely.
that group will change. I'll say, you get a good group of a couple of people, and they could come from your core team, even other disciplines, right? Like I know we met a lot of students from the medical school, right, law school, right, like, and I think that that's an important network as well too. So yeah, there's yeah, you want to in the school will do a good job, and there's like a whole bunch of us, right? Maybe there'll be each class will have a handful, right, and we'll be spread out. So you'll be forced into it in a way, but yeah, it's kind of the sad part, right? Because you develop a lot of relationships from business school, but sometimes once it's over, everybody kind of scatters.
exactly. Just
Their
don't want.
business.
I mean,
Yeah.
from my core study group, I don't think I still talk to any of them in my core study group back from business school because even then, everybody took it as it's just classes and nobody spoke to the other person outside of classes. All I was just wanted to ask about the assignment that is due next week or the next weekend, and that's it. So we never socialize outside of classwork or classrooms. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sad, but yeah, it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. I think for me, key takeaway is just understanding like you have to be very intentional about networking. Like your network is your net worth, so they say, right? So just being intentional, especially as international students, you must understand how important that is to your career, to your goal, to whatever you're doing, whether in the workplace or from school. And also to Jonathan's point, like, that keeps changing, right? So like, you must be very comfortable with that change. Like you must remain very vulnerable, like so that you can constantly expand and get new people into that your network. So thank
And
you so
and
much. Yep.
I'll add
Oh,
one more thing.
mhm.
Even that continues after you graduate, right? Like a lot of us, we were a part of National Black MBA conference. After you graduate, those are still organizations that you can still tap into, right? And you can like I know when I moved to Seattle, I moved in, and that was the first like people I was trying to find one of those networking kind of events and things like that, right? So as you continue, like you have to be intentional. And it's also difficult post graduation, right? In your first year or two, everybody's just trying to hammer out their work. At the same time, even at the company that you end up, you want to continue to network and find people because yeah, you need those people to either give you the knowledge about the company and the nuance that you want to learn, right? That you can spend 5 years trying to figure out and falling through pit holes yourself, but leaning on people that you meet at the company as well, and they'll be very open and candid because they're invested in you as well, right? They call it a personal board of directors, right? You can have one of those and use those folks to lean on for a lot of the things that you're going through as well.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, nothing so much I want to say again. I'm just wish Jonathan well. I'm sure very soon you get a Nigerian wife, right? I'm looking forward to you sharing the experience.
Yeah. Um,
Uh, Looking
yeah.
forward to you.
Appreciate y'all. Only last thought I would say is be the change, or at least I would say is be the change that you want to be, right? Like for me, I know that I didn't have a strong connection to Africans before I got in here, right? So I was like, hey, I want that. So let me go be what I want to be, right? And let me be the change that that you want. So if you're experiencing something and you don't find it, just be that change agent and start to do it. And that's why I could say that I have a very strong connection with the Africans from my university, not even in my class, not the class under me, but even 2 or 3 classes down where people are still contacting me I'm happy to spread knowledge, with those people, right? That's an exclusive for only Olin students though, so not for everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah. This the good stuff. The good stuff goes to my university first, and then I'll give the rest to everybody else.
yeah, yeah. Thanks everyone. Bye. See you.